In a small town where gossip traveled faster than the wind, lived David, a humble mechanic with a heart of gold. He was respected by everyone for his honesty and kindness, but that respect turned to ridicule the day people found out who he was marrying. David met Naomi at the local community center. She was a graceful, kind black woman, volunteering her weekends to help those in need. A widow with 4 children, she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, yet her smile could melt the hardest heart. David was instantly drawn to her warmth. After watching her read stories to a group of children, he shyly introduced himself. Their friendship blossomed over coffee and shared volunteer work. He learned of her struggles, working 2 jobs and barely sleeping but never complaining. She learned of his quiet, lonely life and his dream of having a family. One evening, David confessed his feelings. "Naomi," he said, "I think you're the most beautiful person I've ever met." Naomi laughed gently. "David, you're kind, but I come with a lot of baggage, 4 little ones to start with." He smiled and replied, "That's not baggage, that's a blessing." But in a small town, secrets don't last. The whispers started as soon as people saw them together. "He's lost his mind," a coworker sneered. "A woman with 4 kids? That's not love, that's suicide." The gossip spread like wildfire. "Why would a man like David throw his life away?" someone announced at the grocery store. Even his friends tried to talk him out of it. "Don't ruin your life over someone else's mess," one pleaded. David simply smiled. "She's not someone's mess. She's someone's miracle." When he announced his plans to marry Naomi, his family was horrified. His mother cried, "People will never accept her." His father slammed his fist on the table. "You're going to raise another man's children?" David looked at them and said quietly, "Those kids need a father, and I need them. I love her. I'm not marrying her for what she has. I'm marrying her for who she is." Their wedding was a simple affair in a small church. Naomi wore a modest white dress she had sewn herself, her 4 children standing beside her, shy but smiling. As David held her hands, his own trembling slightly, he promised to take her and her children as his own. "With all my heart." Outside, a small crowd had gathered not to celebrate, but to gawk and gossip. "Let's see how long this fairy tale lasts," one man said sarcastically. They laughed and pointed as the new family walked out of the church. "They'll laugh," Naomi whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "Let them," David replied softly. "One day, they'll see." That evening, as the town buzzed with their story, David and Naomi's small home was filled with a different sound, the innocent, genuine laughter of children playing. Looking at his new family, David thought, "This is what happiness feels like." The days that followed were challenging. The mockery continued, but David never wavered. Every morning he kissed Naomi's forehead. Every night he tucked the children into bed with a story. Their love, quiet and deep, began to grow unshakable roots. While the town laughed, David and Naomi were building a life together, brick by brick, heart by heart. They didn't know it yet, but in a few short years the whispers would change. The very people who mocked them would one day look on with envy, saying, "They jeered when he married her, but now everyone envies them." The laughter didn't stop after the wedding. It just grew louder, but not in a way you'd expect. Every time David walked through town with Naomi and her 4 children, he could feel eyes following him. The whispers weren't even whispers anymore. People didn't bother to hide them. Some smirked as he passed. Others made jokes loud enough for him to hear. "Look, there goes the mechanic with his new responsibility," one man sneered outside the cafe. Another laughed. "5 mouths to feed and none of them his own. What a fool." David heard every word, but he never replied. He'd just squeeze Naomi's hand a little tighter and keep walking, a quiet smile on his face. At first Naomi tried to ignore it too, but the judgment in people's eyes was a constant sting. Women in town who used to greet her warmly now turned away. Some even pulled their children aside when hers came near. "Don't play with them," one mother whispered to her son, thinking Naomi couldn't hear, but she did. Every word was a tiny, sharp cut. At home, Naomi buried her pain behind a smile. She didn't want to burden David. She cooked, cleaned, and filled the house with the sounds of happy children. But at night, when everything was quiet, the tears she held back all day would fall silently. It wasn't shame that made her cry. It was fear. Fear that one day David might regret marrying her. But he never did. One evening he found her on the porch staring at the stars with tears in her eyes. "They'll never accept me, David," she said softly. "They'll always just see a woman with 4 children, not your wife." He sat beside her and took her hand. "Let them think what they want," he said gently. "They don't see what I see. You gave me something I never had, a family. You're not my burden, Naomi. You're my blessing." She looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, a real smile broke through her sadness. Still, life wasn't easy. That first year tested them in every way imaginable. David's mechanic business started to suffer. Some of his regulars stopped coming. "Nothing personal," one man said. "But people talk. I can't risk my reputation." Money became tight. There were days they had to choose between paying a bill and buying a full week's groceries. Through it all, David never complained. He just worked longer hours, often skipping lunch to make sure Naomi and the kids had what they needed. And the children? They were unsure at first. They had lost their father years ago and didn't know what to make of this new man in their lives. The eldest, 16-year-old Marcus, was the most distant. He felt it was his job to protect his mom and siblings, and he didn't trust easily. But David never forced it. He earned their trust the hard way, through actions. He fixed their old bikes, built a small treehouse in the backyard, and showed up for every school event, cheering louder than anyone. Slowly, the ice began to melt. One evening, Marcus came home late from school. His shoulders slumped after being bullied for having a stepdad. David was waiting for him on the porch. "Rough day?" he asked. Marcus looked down. "They said you're not my real dad." David paused, then said, "They're right. I didn't bring you into this world. But if being a real dad means loving you, protecting you, and being proud of you, then I'm as real as it gets." Marcus didn't say anything then. But later that night, he quietly walked into David's room and whispered, "Good night, Dad." From that moment, everything changed. The family grew closer. Naomi's laughter echoed through the house again. The home that once felt quiet was now bursting with life. But outside, the town's judgment remained. It didn't matter anymore. They had built their own world inside that little house, a fortress of love that no gossip could breach. One freezing winter morning, the heater broke. They didn't have the money for a repair. "We'll manage," David said, refusing to borrow. That night he gathered every blanket they owned and spread them on the floor by the fireplace. "We'll sleep here, all together. It'll be warmer," he announced with a grin. The kids laughed, thinking it was a game. They piled together, telling stories until they drifted off in a heap of warmth and love. Naomi looked at them, her children laughing with the man everyone called a fool. She turned to David and whispered, "They said you'd regret marrying me." He smiled, his eyes shining in the firelight. "If this is regret," he said softly, "then I hope I never stop regretting." Outside, snow fell quietly on their small home. Inside, love burned brighter than ever. What no one in that town realized was that while they were busy judging, David and Naomi were building something unbreakable. And though they didn't know it yet, the same people who once mocked them would one day look at their life, their love, their success, their happiness, and whisper those same words again. But this time it wouldn't be with laughter. It would be with envy. 2 years had passed since the laughter first began, but the sound of mockery had long since faded. The same people who once sneered now spoke David and Naomi's names with a quiet admiration, or perhaps a hint of envy they tried to hide. Their life had transformed in ways no one could have imagined, but it hadn't come easily. Every ounce of joy they now felt was earned through sleepless nights, endless work, and an unshakable faith in each other. David's repair shop, once struggling because people avoided him, was now the busiest in town. One afternoon, a wealthy businessman named Mr. Lawson stopped by with a broken truck. While other mechanics would have demanded high prices up front, David simply said, "Let me fix it first. We can talk about payment later." Mr. Lawson watched quietly as David worked tirelessly, refusing to cut any corners. When the truck finally roared back to life, the man couldn't help but smile. "You're an honest man," he said. Honesty is a rare find these days. A week later, Mr. Lawson returned, but not with another vehicle. He came with a proposal. "I'm opening a new auto workshop in the city," he explained. "I want you to manage it. You'll have full control, great pay, and the chance to expand." At first, David hesitated. "I can't leave Naomi and the kids. They're my whole world," he said. But Naomi, who had overheard, gently touched his arm. "Take it, David," she urged. "You've earned this. We'll grow together." And so he did. Within months, his reputation for honesty and skill spread far beyond their small town. Customers from neighboring areas began seeking out the honest mechanic. Meanwhile, Naomi embarked on her own journey of change. Using her experience as a volunteer, she started hosting free workshops for single mothers, teaching them how to budget, apply for jobs, and rebuild their confidence. The very community center that once judged her now invited her to speak at their events. She was no longer the woman they whispered about, she was the woman they looked up to. But the most beautiful transformation was happening at home. Naomi's children had blossomed under David's love. Marcus, who once kept his distance, now proudly introduced David as "my dad," and even helped him at the garage on weekends. Little Ava would often say, "When I grow up, I want to marry someone just like Daddy." Every evening, their house was filled with laughter and warmth as they gathered around the dinner table, sharing their days. Sometimes Naomi would look at David and whisper, "Do you remember how they laughed at us?" He'd grin and reply, "Yes, and now they can't stop watching." One summer afternoon, the town hosted its annual fair, the same fair where years ago they had been openly mocked. Naomi was hesitant to go, but David insisted. "We've hidden long enough," he said. When they arrived, heads turned again, but this time it was with respect. Naomi looked radiant in a soft yellow dress, her warm smile lighting up her face. David walked proudly beside her, holding Ava's hand. At one stall, Mrs. Parker, the same woman who had once called Naomi a mistake, approached them. Her tone was completely different. "Naomi," she began, "I saw the article about your workshops. You're doing wonderful things. I was so wrong about you. About everything." Naomi simply smiled kindly. "It's all right, Mrs. Parker. We've all said things we didn't mean." Mrs. Parker's eyes filled with shame. "No," she said softly. "You meant what you said. Kindness. And it changed us all." That night, as the family returned home, Naomi sat quietly on the porch. David joined her with 2 cups of tea. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked. "Who?" "The people who laughed at us." David smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but not with anger. I think of them like the rain that once ruined our roof. It just made us rebuild stronger." Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "I used to wish I could go back and change how things started. But now, I wouldn't change a thing." The next morning, Marcus came running into their room, waving the local newspaper. "Mom! Dad! Look!" he shouted, grinning from ear to ear. On the front page was a headline, "The couple who defied judgment, David and Naomi S. story inspires the town." Beneath a photo of their smiling family, the caption read, "Once laughed at, now loved. Once doubted, now admired." True love doesn't follow society's rules, it rewrites them. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She looked at David and whispered, "They jeered when you married me. Now they envy us." David wrapped his arm around her. "Let them envy," he said with a smile. "We'll just keep loving." And as the morning sun filled their home, they stood as living proof that love doesn't need approval. It only needs courage. The years passed softly, like pages turning in a well-loved book. The town that once mocked David and Naomi had changed, and so had they. What began as a love story ridiculed by all had now become a symbol of unity, strength, and hope. Their laughter, the genuine, joyful kind, now echoed through the same streets where whispers once followed them. On a bright spring morning, David sat on the porch sipping coffee while Naomi tended to her flowers. Their children were no longer children. Marcus had a scholarship for engineering, Tia was studying to be a teacher, and the younger two, Liam and Ava, were growing into kind souls, just like their parents taught them. Naomi looked up from her garden and smiled. "Do you realize," she said softly, "it's been 10 years since that day?" David smiled, pretending not to understand. "Which day?" "The day they laughed," she said, a chuckle in her voice. "The day they said you'd regret marrying me." David leaned back, his eyes warm with memory. "I do regret one thing," he said. Naomi raised an eyebrow, teasing. "Oh? And what's that?" "That I didn't find you sooner." She laughed, shaking her head. "You always know what to say." But deep down, she knew he meant it. Later that week, their family was invited to the annual community honors ceremony. Naomi Oya's name was on the list of honorees for her incredible work with single mothers and underprivileged children. The woman once scorned was now being recognized for her compassion. As they arrived, the same people who once avoided her now greeted her with open arms. Mrs. Parker, the very woman who had mocked her years ago, hugged her tightly. "Naomi," she said with tears in her eyes, "you didn't just build a family, you built a community." Naomi smiled softly. "It wasn't just me. David's love made everything possible." When it was her turn to speak, Naomi stood on stage in a simple blue dress. Her voice was calm and steady. "Years ago," she began, "many people told me I didn't belong here. They said love couldn't survive our differences. But love isn't about matching backgrounds, it's about matching hearts. And the man I married, he saw not what I had lost, but what I still had to give." The audience listened in silence, many with tears in their eyes. Naomi continued. "They laughed once. I don't blame them. They didn't understand. But today I hope they see that love built on respect and kindness can outlive every doubt, every insult, every prejudice." When she finished, the entire hall stood to applaud. The sound filled the air, echoing louder than any laughter ever had. David stood in the front row, clapping with pride, their children beside him, their hearts full. Afterwards, a journalist asked David, "Sir, what do you think when people say they envy you now?" David chuckled. "If envy means wanting a life built on love and struggle, they're welcome to it. But what we have isn't luck, it's faith. We believed in each other when no one else did." That evening, as the sun set, they returned to their quiet, warm home. Naomi walked out to the porch. "Do you remember when I used to say people would never change?" she asked. David joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Yes, and I told you love would prove them wrong." She nodded, looking at the horizon. "You were right. They did change. Maybe because love changes everything it touches." The next morning, a letter arrived. It was from the town council. The new children's park would be named the Miller Family Garden. The note read, "For showing us what family truly means." Naomi pressed the letter to her heart and smiled. "They laughed once," she said quietly. "Now they're naming parks after us." David laughed, pulling her into a hug. "That's the funny thing about time," he whispered. "It always reveals what was real." Years later, when people in town spoke of love stories, they didn't talk about fairy tales. They talked about David and Naomi, the man who dared to love a woman the world looked down on, and the woman who turned judgment into inspiration. Their story became a lesson told in schools, a symbol of hope. And sometimes when young couples asked David for advice, he'd smile and say, "They'll laugh at you now. Let them. Because one day, those same people will wish they had what you were brave enough to fight for." The world outside changed, but in their hearts, everything was as it had been on that first day, pure, strong, and unbreakable. Because the truth is simple, love that is mocked today often becomes the love that others envy tomorrow. And for David and Naomi, that truth had become their greatest triumph.